right. I'm pretty excited for this for a couple of reasons. Dan, my man, Lonsdale. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
Dude, I'm good. We finally connected after so long, and we're on a time change, so negotiating times that work between us is almost impossible. You're a busy man.
Yeah, it's interesting trying to get that time difference, and then when we're not working, it's almost impossible. So.
Yeah, exactly right. There's zero time that we have an hour to overlap and chat, but here we are. We got it.
Yeah, perfect.
And I'm gonna just do a self plug here and say that I finally got all of my podcasting equipment set up, and hopefully I sound a lot better, and so does Dan. And there's a very good chance that something goes terribly wrong in the middle of this, and we lose it all. So bear with us for just some of the technical side.
You sound lovely though, so it sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's good. I'm flattered. I have a lot of credit to people who are in the podcasting world who were like, hey man, your podcast is good information, but you sound terrible and I can't listen in the car. So figure it out or I'm going to stop listening. I was like, okay, point taken.
Shooting pretty straight, but fair enough.
Brutal honesty is what you need, right?
So.
All right. Enough banter, man. I think we are here to help a lot of people with one of probably the most common issues that I get asked about is just power development, right? Like, so I'll set the stage a little bit. So kids are always constantly trying to get faster, stronger, have tighter shapes in gymnastics. They're trying to express more power. And I think that it's a very murky area of gymnastics because there's so many things that you could do, right, to do well. And so what I usually try to do is I try to find more information myself when I was younger, but reach out to people who are a little bit more educated in this space than me. And so I found Nick, I found you, I found Rupert, I found a lot of the strength coaches at Champion. So for some of the people that are not, aware of your background or what you're doing, let's kind of just chat about, your background and working with Nick a little bit. And then we'll kind of break into the actual nitty gritty stuff of how do we get good, faster, run harder, have bigger skills, things like that.
Oh, cool. So I've been a strength and conditioning coach for 8 years now. Very proudly, multi-sport is when I started out. So I worked at basically Durham University for a number of years, which is the number one team sport university in the UK for people who might not know. During that time, I set up a youth scheme, basically trying to work with as many talented athletes in the Durham region as possible. And it was during that time that we went into a gymnastics club in Durham to work with Amy Tinkler. And that's where I met Nick. So as soon as I met Nick, we got on, we spoke the same language, became close friends. And that was my first introduction. I was very fortunate. My first introduction was Amy Tinkler, but that was my first introduction into gymnastics. And my role there was basically just to try and support the club and then basically run a program that Amy was provided by her S&C coaches from our institute and just make sure everything was just working pretty sanely. And then I just fell in love with it. Just loved it. It was like no other sport I'd ever been in. I'd never done gymnastics myself, so I was a very average rugby player. And I would have been a significantly worse gymnast. So for me, I was just very privileged that, I had some welcoming people who just welcomed me into the sport. And then I started to provide value, and I realized actually I have a place in this sport, sort of trying to help people and applying principles that other sports have been doing for years and that isn't particularly being done with our sport of gymnastics. And then that's how I met you. So I met you through Nick. So you were over in the UK for a masterclass, and then it was a similar thing. So, Nick said straight away, you're going to get on with him. You sound the same. You speak the same language. So we went out for dinner, and sure enough, that was it.
Yeah, one what do we have? Brazilian steakhouse with the beer and stuff, and we had a long evening of eating way too much.
Yeah, I overindulged again.
But yeah, man, that's awesome. It's cool to hear your background. And then I don't know, I've watched you kind of develop over the last, like you said, 3 or 4 years, and it seems like you're kind of in a rocket ship right now, is where, you know your stuff really well and you're super intelligent, but also I think one of the best things you have is you're a really good balance of the high level geeky stuff, but then practical implementation. And I think that that's probably the most important, right? We're weird, man. Nobody likes to read really in-depth stuff like we do sometimes. There's a lot of coaches out there and medical providers out there who are just trying to do the best they can in the trenches. And I think that people sometimes really want access to better information, but it's hard to digest in the medical or the strength conditioning literature. So you're doing a really good job of applying some of these things in the day-to-day level, which I think is what people really enjoy.
I think so. I think it all came from just spending hours and hours in the gym coaching. So I was trying to cram in as much knowledge as I could, but actually I have a lot of skin in the game of just being there coaching. And you soon realize that some of the stuff isn't applicable, and you realize some of it is applicable. But the way you get that across to coaches and athletes has to be simple. Otherwise, they're just not going to do it.
Yeah, and when you say coaching, right, you're referring to in the strength and conditioning gym coaching with people like lifting weights and doing hardcore stuff, right? Not gymnastics coaching.
I was coaching for like 10, 12 hours a day for maybe 6 years. So yeah, it was like skin in the game in the trenches. So it was good fun, but yeah.
Yeah, man, no pressure, no diamonds.
Yeah, man.
Cool. So then kind of share with us now about what the last few years have looked at. I know you and I have done a lot more work together, and we're helping you kind of grow more of an audience, as you should have one. But what's going on now with like your more, strategic role in gymnastics and what you're trying to do to help people?
Yeah. So for years I had this idea that, I should just have my own consultancy and just be working with gymnastics coaches and gymnasts. And then in January that I was like, right, that's it. I'm doing it. It's happening. So I just set it up and just started real modest, just took on 1 or 2 gyms and just started to go in there and make an impact. And then just trying to just document that journey as humbly as possible, really, is like, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm learning. This is what I think is value to you. You can take it or you can leave it. And ever since I've done that, it's just growing in such a really nice way. Like it's not overwhelming, which I quite like. I need that. And then just reaching out to you and Nick regularly just about the journey itself, because you guys are years ahead of where I'm at. But it's just I'm just very blessed that I have you to just bounce ideas off of where you're at and where you guys are going, and then I'll just sort of try and help and be another source of consistent information for people.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. It's easy to help people that are hardworking and want to help themselves. So don't sell yourself short on that. Yeah. But I think it's there's a couple areas of gymnastics that I see rapidly changing, right? And it's almost like as soon as you tip that ball over the hill, there's no stopping it downhill. And one of them is just a really different approach to strength and conditioning, flexibility as well, which kind of includes movement screening and understanding certain types of exercises are probably a better fit for certain athletes. And we'll talk about this more as we move into the power stuff. But I think that that's going to be an area that for anybody listening and people that have followed me is probably just, you see it happening more and more, right? Like some of the NCAA teams over here in the States that I work with are much more, if they weren't doing it already, they're way on board now. And if they were doing it, it was kind of like a luxury or like an icing on the cake sort of thing about like doing a little bit of more of a hybrid model. Many gyms are doing a lot of gymnastic specific conditioning, which is super important, but we have to realize that the sport has become so hard that you can't afford not to do a more of a hybrid approach that has some kind of mixed modality stuff, that has some deloaded, some periodization training and stuff like that, and has a very specific approach to power training, metabolic training, flexibility training, movement screening, injury prevention. Like this stuff is so essential. It's almost like equally, if not more important than the actual technical training, because you can't teach kids new skills if they're not strong enough, fast enough, they don't have the flexibility for it, or they are not physically ready to take the training volume that they need to do these high-level skills. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's one sport where I've worked and where it is just continually growing and rapidly. Like year on year, athletes are doing things that others haven't the year before. And like when you compare that to other sports, there's no other sport doing that, like growing at that rate. And like you said, in order to do that and make sure you're doing it effectively and safely, having a good grasp of this stuff is vital. It's not an option anymore. It's changing for the better as well, I think. I think lots of coaches, I was having a lot of conversations with coaches at a conference the other day, and they actually see the need for it now, and they understand what it is in the sense of what the title is. So things are on the turn 100%. I think it's just such a rapidly evolving sport that we've just got to keep going with it and just keep trying to push it and drive it forward in the safest way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think we're going to see that we put in a couple of years of work in terms of like really realigning our core values and having better culture, having a workload system be built that accurately trains, workload measurements, but then also just a better systematic education worldwide about these principles of, again, strength, flexibility, screening, injury, stuff like that, and building those into kind of a newer model where we have the best of everybody's opinion. You know what I mean? And so I think that we'll look back in 2 years and be like, whoa, this looks completely different than what we were doing a couple of years ago for the better, which is great. But like we were saying, it takes it takes an honest humility to realize that you have a lot more to learn, but then it's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work to read this stuff and understand it and try new stuff in the gym and change the culture about trying some new stuff. And, I think that's why I like doing these podcasts with people like yourself, because we can take some information that's, maybe a little overwhelming to people when they look in a textbook or when they look on like a course, and we can give it to them in maybe a usable, digestible chunk.
Yeah, 100%. Like one part of my philosophy is actually trying to give coaches the scientific information just in the simplest form possible.
Yep.
I think they have one of the hardest jobs in the world, in the sense that you'll hear me say this all the time now as well, is that they have one of the hardest jobs because they have to basically teach every single apparatus and be world class at it. And then, those apparatuses, they could be sports in themselves. And then on top of that, it's like, oh, and now you need to learn about physical preparation, which is just someone's career. Like, that is my knowledge and that's it. And I just think it must be really overwhelming. Because, when I dip my toe into the gymnastics stuff, it's really overwhelming. So, yeah, I think they have a tough job, but hats off to them for giving it a go, because they're starting to read stuff and digest things and ask questions that, we never used to get asked. So it's good. It's definitely on the turn. Yeah,
man. And it's exciting to see too, because like you said, there's a lot of stuff application wise that's probably not super relevant for gymnastics. Like some stuff that, this is with every sport, at Champion where we work and some other places, it's like every type of sport athlete has a slightly different program because of the needs, because of the way they do it and stuff like that. And so you got to keep an open mind to this stuff that we'll talk about, but also got to realize that you want to work with a strength coach or learn more yourself, and realize that it's a little bit more open-ended, and we're kind of, I say we're sometimes building the train tracks as the train drives at us in gymnastics, because it's changing so fast.
I think so. I think it's just understanding that it's one part of a bigger picture sometimes, and just it's not gospel. It's whether it's appropriate for you and your gym, your athletes, and how you have, and just using it wisely. That time is just vital. So make sure you're using it wisely.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So let's kind of get into that too, because I think that we were talking about off the air, right? So it's very easy to maybe not understand the principles and have a bunch of ideas and exercises in your mind that you want to work to make the kids faster, to make their tumbling higher, to make, their swings on whether it is like high bar, P bars, whatever it is, more aggressive. But what are some of the basic principles to, what is power and what goes into making, somebody more powerful? Like what is it from a foundational point of view before we get into the nitty gritty?
Yeah, like foundation is just key, isn't it? So I think you look at power, and in its purest form it's the rate at which you produce force. Okay, so how quickly can you produce force? All right, but then when you think about that and you work back from it, is the word in there is force. So like you need to actually be able to produce some force before you can do it quickly. So then you're looking at like something forceful is something strength based. So has that athlete got a good foundation of strength? And then if you actually work back from that athlete of can they produce force, but they actually need to have some stability as well in order to produce that. So you start with your power work and all of a sudden you're ending up at stability at the other end of the spectrum. Is make them stable, make sure that they can then produce some force, and then start to ask them to produce it as quick as possible, which will be then power. And then you work upwards, where things start to get a little bit quicker, and you look at sort of velocity-based training. So that's where you're looking at like purely how quickly you can do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to think about it maybe as an equation that I always talk about, is power is a product of force over time, right? So you have the ability to, like you said, if you want to have the ability to just at a raw level produce more force, the way to do that is through an increase in, muscle strength or output, right? So like you have to be able to either have more cross-sectional area of the muscle, or you have to be able to maybe synchronize the motor neurons, the output together faster, right? And I don't want to get too heady into it, but essentially that top product is the actual force, okay? And that's why we do strength and conditioning in general, right? But also it's why it's so important is that if you're trying to get someone to be more powerful, you probably have to have some sort of increase in raw baseline strength before you try to ask them to produce that faster. You know what I mean? So think about it as an equation of, okay, I'm trying to build more force. I need to get them stronger. And then the other piece of that, which is the time equation, is if you can express that force quicker, like you said, you're going to have more global power output. And so the way that we always think about that is that there's obviously the better you are with gymnastics technique, the stiffer you are, the more ability you have to tune the equipment because you're so tight in hollow arch shapes or shape changing that you're not leaking energy, where you're saving some of that, ability to not, lose some of that power when you do try to swing real hard. So think about the athlete who is very, very strong, but doesn't have the best basic foundation. When they try to tap, it's kind of like, kind of just goes nowhere. But an athlete that really understands stiffness and basics techniques and how to move their body in synchrony between arch hollow, when they snap, a lot more of that power shows up, again, because they're allowing that strength to be expressed across that time interval. And so you can definitely do gymnastics technique, which is super important, and work drills and work, hey, put your hands here, move here, like swing harder here. Like that's part of the art of coaching. But people don't often realize that there's another way to manipulate time, which is by doing specific power exercises, right? Can you chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, 100%. So like there's, you've got a technical element to what you're doing 100%. And you need that in order for that to occur. But then, like you said, you're trying to manipulate the time in which you do things as well, which I think is interesting. So you're looking at like specific gymnastics, like sort of power exercises, 100%. So you'd be looking at, like your rebounding and things like that. That's a specific skill to an athlete that they need to be able to, be able to rebound on their feet and on their hands. So you're looking to take away that sponginess in that athlete and produce some stiffness.
Right, absolutely. And I think that conceptually, when people are thinking about how to go about this, right, you can think about, okay, if my goal is by, say we're in a 3-month off-season block where we're saying like we want to try to get our strength and we want to get new drills, teach technical foundations, stuff like that. You should be probably thinking about it as like, okay, I'd like to use physical preparation as a vessel to get them stronger and to do some, more just strength work. And then also say at the same time, I'm maybe going to try to work on the technical aspects of stiffness and basic body shapes and things like that. But you want to try to mold those two things together to be like, okay, after we do a strength block and we're working on these technical foundations, let's then transition over to more of a power block, right? Where we're trying to maybe teach the athletes how to be a little bit faster, a little bit stiffer. So maybe you do 8 weeks or so of strength training, more focused in the summer, and then you transition that into a 4 to 8 week power development cycle where you're trying to funnel those strength adaptations into that time equation, right? And at the same time, you're probably getting much better with your technique and you're starting to move things onto harder equipment. Is, I think conceptually that's probably a good way for people to think about it, is to do like, okay, strength and then some power work and then technical foundations of basics, and then move those into the actual harder skills or really performing those things well. And I think what happens is by the end of that off-season training block, you're left with an athlete who is a little bit stronger and more resilient. They're also more, stiff. They understand, how to technically be sound, and that becomes the foundation for you to really have, the raw workings of someone who can do a whole bunch of new skills together, or then you start working on their endurance so they can keep that, output up for a long time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Like the way I try and describe it to coaches as well is like that off-season thing, and you were talking about it quite nicely as like a funnel and a blend of like you start with, what is important, that foundational strength, and you try and blend it. So the way I describe it is if you think of it as a blend of that you're not just going this and that and that. Like you're not just flicking light switches on and off to go from strength to power to this. It's a blend because you understand where they want to be by the end of that block. And like you said, that's the physical stuff. And then within that periodized plan, there's also going to be like the technical stuff that will blend into where they want to be as well. And then by the end of that block, like you said, what was it, 3 months?
Yeah.
That by the end of that 3 months, like you said, you have an athlete who then has developed physically and technically. So now you have an athlete there, you can teach them new skills and new routines. And then if you do that, so if you're thinking long term, so we're not trying to create an Olympian in 3 months, we're just thinking like we're just trying to be better than we were last year, is if you do that year on year, then all of a sudden in 4 years' time, you have an athlete who's really significantly improved physically, strength, power, rate of force production, velocity, and then technically as well. And it's all just been this really casual blend together that is the key thing. So no, yeah, I think that's the best way to do it, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it well. We're kind of building a mixed model here where we're not, not doing anything but strength exercises for 8 weeks, we're doing a little bit of everything, right? We're adding some balance stuff, some technical stuff, some maybe some neural prep where we do have some power work in to get the body ready for some of those things. And I think that that's super important, is that it's not just like a cut and dry only strength. So with that in mind, I think that people are sometimes a little bit overwhelmed then about like, okay, well, how do I start from just the basic strength stuff? Like, what are the basic elements of, let's just go with lower body power to start with. So say if we want to try to get someone to run faster for vault, or have, more jumping and landing expression off the floor for tumbling, or, we could also use the core and upper body as well. But what are some things that you find very helpful to start with, like baseline strength exercises?
So you're looking at like the basics done brilliantly well, right? So you're looking at squatting patterns, hinging patterns, being strong on a single leg. And in its simplest form, that's probably what you're looking at. And then taking down lower limb as well. So let's never take like the ankle and the calf complex out of the equation. Like, is that strong enough to cope with what you're going to be asking it to do soon? And in its simplest form, that's it. There's variations of exercises, but we're trying to talk about principles. So get strong in those patterns, because they're going to be replicated at a higher rate later down the line.
Yep, absolutely, right. So just like you said, just like gymnastics has basics, fitness and strength conditioning has basics too. And Kiefer and I had a pretty good podcast on how do you design that, early in season, early off season kind of stuff is, like you said, squatting, hinging, single leg, maybe that's a step up, a lunge or something of that nature, some balance stuff, some balance of anterior and posterior chain work between the hamstrings, glutes, and the quads, making sure that there's a good balance there throughout the week. And like you said, single leg training, some rotational stuff. Like it's once you learn the exercises and really understand how to coach them well, there's 4 different squat exercises you can use based on what kids' limitations are, 4 different hinge exercises, a couple different single leg stuff. The program design is not as bad as you think. The implementation is hard sometimes because you have to really be a magician with planning your time well, but there's a way to plan those exercises throughout a week. Make sure it goes, 3 weeks on and 1 week off, or 4 weeks on, whatever it is works for your gym. But without that baseline level of strength, when you just tell the kid to run faster, you're not quick enough, you need to run faster. Well, you're almost kind of setting them up for failure, because those kids have not had the opportunity to get stronger and learn these principles of expressing power, right?
Like what have you done to that athlete to allow them to run quicker? Because if you haven't, you're just asking them to just run quicker because you've told them. Like, if that was the case, like, coaching would just be dead easy. Is like, just do that better, and they would just do things better. You need to give them a chance and give them some foundational stuff before you start to ask them to express that force in the way you want them to for the sport. Normally in gymnastics, we know that that's at a high rate, right? So yeah, I completely agree. And when you were talking there, I sort of said squat, hinge, some single leg work, but then you pad that out really quickly. Like you said, 4 squatting movements, 4 hinging movements, some single leg work. And then all of a sudden, like you said, you've literally just created a program there in like a sentence. And then the beauty is in using it in the best way possible. And that's where the art of coaching comes in. Like, when's the right time? When's the wrong time? What are we going to sacrifice on the day? So maybe that foundational stuff is the priority earlier in the year. So it's always that pushing and pulling between coaches, but obviously like professional, like elite pushing and pulling. So it's, I want the best, you want the best. Today I really want the best. So this is what we're going to do. And that's the way I do it. I love that stuff as well, right? Like, being a coach, that's what I love. Like that to and fro with a coach is the best thing. I embrace it. It's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of taking a step back from all this stuff is oftentimes, coaches who are listening, it's like preaching to the choir. They want to get the kids stronger. They want the kids to work harder and stuff like that. But oftentimes it's hard to implement these things, and the kids maybe aren't as motivated sometimes to do, the older athletes typically understand that it's important as part of it. But a lot of these younger athletes just have a tough time grappling with why they have to do this strength stuff, or why we're using weights now, or why we're spending so much time on this. And I think the way to really do this is you have to sell them to their goals, right? So if you say, okay, like, what do you want out of gymnastics? Like, well, I want to move to the next level. I want to flip this vault. I want to do a new release move, whatever it is. I want to, compete in a new routine next year. You say, okay, well, those skills that you're trying to do that are hard, that you haven't learned yet, require more power. You have to be more powerful and tap harder and tumble, harder if you want to get high enough to do a double full or do your Yurchenko layout or whatever it is. So you explain to them, say, okay, if your goal is to get more powerful, how do you think you're going to get there? This is the foundation of how you get more powerful. And I explained in very simple terms what we just talked about like, well, we have to be stronger and we have to be able to go a little bit quicker. So if we want one of those two things to happen, we're going to have to work on the time piece of being technically sound and showing up every day and doing the consistent basics all the time and doing a lot of repetitions, on the drills and things like that to be stiff. But also you need to get stronger, and you need to get stronger. And you need to put in the effort and the intensity to these drills now, but then later down the road, when we get later in the summer, is put in the work for the power stuff, because that's going to set you up to run faster, to hit the board harder, to, swing harder on the rails if you want to do those skills that you're telling me are fun for you, that are important. So I'm trying to set you up for success with a safety mindset, and that how to do these skills technically, but also that you're physically ready for it. And usually once you take the time and you walk people through that, kind of light bulbs go off and they go, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's okay, well, if you want to do your ankle layout, you got to run faster, you got to be stiffer. This is the way to get there. It's just through these basic kind of grunt work strength stuff.
I think so. I think the days that used to exist, unfortunately, of just like do it because I said so, are gone, which is great. But you have to combat that with something else, which is total transparency in your program. So this is what I've got planned now. This is where you want to go, and this is how it's going to benefit you. Like, not me, you, like your journey as an athlete, whether that's in gymnastics or wherever it is. If they don't buy into what you're doing with them, they're not going to do it with intent. So all of a sudden you're just running a program where the athlete's just like, well, that's my S&C done for the day. So you're not going to get anything out of that. But like you said, taking the time to explain to them, this is going to allow you to, tap harder, swing around the bar more efficiently, produce more force so you get more time in the air. And that's one thing I normally get is like, imagine if I could give you some more time in the air, what you could do. And then it's also like, imagine if I gave you the ability to stick things that you just couldn't dream of doing safely. And it's like little conversations like that just spark their imagination. If they're like, okay, that's interesting. I do want that. That's what I want to do. And then also explaining to them, like I've seen you put some stuff out recently, but not everything has to look like gymnastics in order to be gymnastics. And the way I describe that is like near and far transfer. So far transfer is things like squatting, hinging, single leg work. So it doesn't particularly look like gymnastics, or it's not going to feel like it either to the athlete. But then at the other end of the spectrum, later in the year when things get more specific, that's near transfer. So the things you're doing will look and feel like it, and it's closer to the sport to transfer over. But it doesn't mean that either or are less important than each other. They're equally as beneficial. It's just the time in the year that we do that. And just telling the athlete that that's the case. This doesn't feel like gymnastics, but, in 16 weeks, it will feel like gymnastics. Like when you're jumping higher, you'll understand. And I think that's a really interesting topic that you brought up, is like speaking to the athletes, not just the coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's education is a foundational pillar of, I think, everything we should be doing in gymnastics, whether we're teaching them about gymnastics technique itself, or we're teaching them about mental strategies to stay calm during a meet, whether we're teaching them about recovery and how to sleep well and take care of themselves, or, all these things are part of the reason that we're doing gymnastics in the first place, is to educate the athlete more about how to, help them reach their goals. We're not doing it for them. We're helping them do it for themselves.
Yeah. And it's their journey. So don't worry about anyone else's, just worry about yours. And I'm going to try and help you with your gymnastics journey, wherever that takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And I'm just thinking now, you raised a really good point about, the not looking like gymnastics, but, being more contributors. So there's two things here I want to touch upon. One is that, we'll go into it, but there's a very big difference between, like the plyometric stiffness needed for rebounding and for like what we usually call like tendon recoil, right? And then also like true rate of force development, or like expression of force, right? Those are slightly two different things. The same way that you have, different sport specific technique, you also have general technique that every athlete should be able to do. So we'll touch upon that next. But I think something that's really important is that you got to realize that the shapes and the basics of gymnastics and the way you use the equipment is all the same anatomy, right? Every athlete has the same general anatomy about hamstrings, quads, core musculature, arms, triceps, biceps, whatever it is. And the ability to do these basic patterns and also be able to strengthen the individual pieces of the system is what eventually allows you to become a gymnast again and do well. So just because you're doing med ball slams, overhead med ball slams, and it doesn't look like you're tapping on high bar, it's still a very fundamental arch, hollow, snap, shape change, right? A power exercise that you do down the road. Same thing with sprinting drills, right? Or with battling ropes, or with sled pushes and speed sprints and stuff like that. Like, yes, it doesn't look like you're doing specific sprint, hurdle, round off, flick, lay, whatever, but you're doing all of the pieces necessary for the system itself to become more powerful. And then you build that into, again, gymnastics technique with stiffness and stuff like that.
Like we've had these we should have recorded our conversations like years ago, right? But in previous conversations, me and you sort of said that it's different, not special. So,
very good.
Yeah, the body is the body. So the way it's made up is the way it's made up. Like, it's not different for you and I. Like, we're all made up of the same thing. So the way you put that is, when you are mimicking movements through like the biomechanics of the movement, like a med ball slam, like, it will affect you the same way it affects me, in the sense of that's what we're trying to strengthen. So yeah, always bear that in mind. It's an amazing sport, but it is a sport. So it's no different to other sports, in the sense of like, there are requirements for it and we're just training for it. The body's the same. Yeah,
absolutely. And so then, that's a really good place to move on to, is like, so obviously lower body, right? Squat, hinge, single leg, push, pull, some ankle calf complex. The core obviously requires gymnastics motion, but also resisting motion. So we have, flexion or curling or extending, rotating, side bending, those kind of things, bracing and global compression. And then you have the anti-movements are the basis of strength too, like anti-rotation stuff and anti-extension. Like, we've gone pretty extensive into that. And then the upper body is pretty basic. It's, vertical push-pull up and down, and horizontal push-pull, some single arm stuff, some cuff and dynamic stability. But those are the basics of the foundation of strength. So now moving on. So say someone has done that strength base and they say, okay, yeah, we've definitely worked our tail off for 8 or so weeks. And we've seen objective changes in like the number of repetitions they can do for pull-ups, or, how they're doing with weight, or they're squatting a little bit more, or things like that. What's the next transition point there to start to get somebody into that power domain? Because the error that I see is that people just do a ton of ground contacts, and they start doing like a ton of panel mat plyo lines, or just super high box jumps and rebounding box jumps. And before they can get an adaptation, they get a growth plate injury before they actually get there. And so they feel like they're well-intentioned. They're not trying to hurt the kid, but they're like, well, I know I need to do these power exercises. So they just do tons of rebounding or sprints, or they run outside on the asphalt from their shoes and stuff, and it blows kids' shins up. Like, what do you suggest is the good way to transition that with things that are going to work towards that end goal of power, but not maybe flare up any issues?
Yeah, and it's like, goes right back to that blend of you're coming from something forceful. So let's not just jump to something right down the other end of that. So for me, you're looking at like landing, jumping and landing. Like single leg jumping and landing. It's very similar to the little snippets that we had in the strength stuff, but you're looking at trying to get them to do the movements, but increase the rate that they do it. So if you look at someone, just take, for example, a box jump, it's still a squatting pattern, okay? But all I'm doing this time is, rather than asking them to produce a massive amount of force, I'm actually asking them to produce force quicker, because if you don't, you're not going to land on the box. And it's just that blend, and then that takes you into your power work quite nicely. I think that's quite a nice example as well, that people will, I think we can all relate to that, is the reason you don't jump on a box is because you haven't produced the force quickly, all right? And then you just having a great time. So yeah, I think that's a very good example to go with. What do you reckon? What do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously like box jumps are something that's very low barrier to entry. I think that's great. I think that I try my best to make sure that we're getting a similar type of pattern, as like you said, a squatting, a hinging, like that. So for definitely for single leg stuff, I like doing single leg lunge jumps, right? So putting like on a low box and having someone do single leg, I call them lateral rockets. So they're just like trying to drive the opposite knee, more of a jumping on one side. So kind of looks like a Mario jump, if you're familiar with that game at all, but I like that one. So single leg lateral rockets are really, really good. They're, again, not a ton of ground contacts, but they also teach that kind of quick twitch. I also have been using a lot of like split squat jumps too. So starting in like a split squat position and doing like drops in depth as high as you can. Those are really good. I also really, Yeah, those are really solid, especially in the pattern that gymnasts need for like splits and stuff like that for switch leaps. I think it's good. And usually off the backbone of like a strength and conditioning cycle of like rear foot elevated split squats, like moving into that kind of stuff seems to be really, really effective. And then also I really like doing anything in the horizontal, like kind of vector, right? So if like hinging and stuff, like people do sometimes do a lot of like Russian kettlebell swings, but I think that's really tough for gymnasts to grasp well. But, you know, doing like a single leg glute bridge, but doing it with one leg kind of hugged up to your chest and doing like an explosive single leg plyo jump off the ground after doing like a lot of single leg bridges and hinging and stuff like that. I found that those kind of 3 or 4 exercises when programmed for a well are seeming to be like a really good blend over there for just the strictly lower body. And then I use a lot of med balls and a lot of ropes as well for that kind of transitional month where it's like you're trying to use the hips and core together. So a standing med ball slam is really good for hip extension, right? A seated overhead med ball throw is really good for the core, for the arms to work together. A lot of, you know, overhead step throws or chest passes, things like that. Again, it's not super high ground contacts on the legs or, you know, high impacts on the arms and elbows, but you're slowly ramping up the body to take some of that plyometric, what's called amortization phase, which is like rapid deceleration and pushing, right? So we're going to try to do some of that stuff for a transition point of like 4 to 6 weeks, which is what, you know, now that I've worked with other things that are other programs, they say that they find that very helpful as well because they can delay that high loading that kids have through, you know, regular skill repetitions. But it seems to develop those characteristics of taking strength into that rate of force development, but also teaching them to be very, very effortful and have high intent, right? If you say like, hey, I want you to put a hole in the ground with this med ball and slam as hard as you possibly can for 5 reps, that's going to be a better training stimulus than let's go for 45 seconds and, you know, get as many as you can. You know, it starts to fall off really kind of like, so the kids kind of just die off. But you want to try to really give them 4 to 8 sets or 4 to 7 sets of 5 with enough time in between those reps to recover their energy system. But that seems to be kind of where I'm at right now for that transitional period.
I think so. Like I literally agree with everything you've just said, is just progressing through. And a lot of the exercises, you know, for example, you use the hip bridge was a good example, is it's literally the same movement pattern, but you're just asking for more drive. So the outcome, you're giving the athlete an outcome of like, I want you to drive so high that your foot leaves the box and then re-lands. It's like a drive. And I think having that blend of like, you've given them some really good foundational stuff, but what I found with gymnasts is, like what you said, is you need to actually get them to be able to use it, like to understand what they now possess a little bit more of and using it. So like you said, by trying to encourage them to move at a faster rate with those exercises, you're working along that blend really well. And then you've got your athletes training with some real intent. Like normally that power stuff as well is outcome driven. So if you're not, like you said, if you're not doing it properly, like it's very evident. Like normally it's, you either don't make the jump, or, you know, the med ball doesn't bounce back up to you, or it isn't noisy. And it's, you know, it's similar for like your rope stuff as well that you do as well. Is like, it's evident the waves in the rope won't make it to where it's attached. So it's really easy for those athletes to check themselves as well, as like, am I actually being intentful and purposeful about what I'm doing here, or am I just taking this as a circuit, which is the wrong approach? 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, and I think it's good because it allows them to safely develop that intensity. You know what I mean? I think sometimes in fortune gymnastics, we expose kids to intensity with high level skills and technical stuff first. And I think that sometimes that can be problematic for, you know, if they lack foundational basics and you're trying to go really hard on skills, sometimes before they're technically proficient, that can cause some issues. So I think it allows a safe arena for them to really get after it a little bit and, you know, like have some fun with it. But it's hard and it's challenging, but it's also super, super safe. And I would say kind of on the backbone of that too is, I don't know, I think that I really enjoy the approach of the blended piece, because as you're getting kids to be faster or they're expressing more power and stuff like that, right, they start to click a little bit and they start to understand what that feels like, you know what I mean? And then they tend to allow the floodgates to open up a little bit more on some of their skills when they feel safe for it. So I would say that some of the stuff is not only a good way to build these foundational pieces, but it's also a good way to kind of like set them up for success with some of the more, you know, power on the equipment down the road, which would come in the preseason, stuff like that. Yeah,
I think so. I think, like you said, it just being stronger makes you feel confident, like 100%. And for that athlete to be able to see the progression that they've made is really empowering for them. So it's, you know, 6 weeks ago, you were nowhere near doing that. that wasn't a possible thing. Look at you now. Look at what you're capable of doing. And then you're just reinforcing all the things that you want them to buy into all the time. And then, like you said, that's naturally, you're just going to get an athlete with like a little bit more swagger about what they do. Like, not in an arrogant way, just very like, you've got to be able to back yourself to do certain things in gymnastics. And when, in order to do that, like you need to be able to do it, but then physically you need to be able to do it. So when you have both of those things, then you have a confident athlete who's ready to try things. And I think that's a great thing, just to see them change. It's really evident when you know that they're changing. It's just great to see them encouraged in that way.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's kind of, you just sparked a thought for me too, that like, obviously it's like, that's super important from the mental side, but there's a massive amount of physiological support for what we're doing in terms of like strengthening the body itself to take more, loading and training volume, right? So when you're doing these strength to power progressions and you're spending more time on just building a robust general athlete, well, like they're definitely getting more, obviously, strength in their muscular capacity to handle some of these high forces. The cartilage, the bone, the tendon is all becoming quite a bit stronger, and you're teaching the neuromuscular system to be very quick and turn on when it's needed and kind of modulate force, right? So gymnastics is not always about, like you said, it's not a light switch where you're like max contraction or not, right? You need some graded fluency here. So it's important that athletes understand how to not only express that top end force, but also they have that baseline level of, strength in their joints and their tendon stuff. And I think that's why this stuff is making such a noise in the gymnastics community now, because people realize that, the myth of kids peaking so early is now later. And so if we can take some foundational years when they're like 10, 12, 14, and really just build a lot of technical skill basics that are not being competed on super hard surfaces, but are also, they're getting stronger, they're getting more confident with their gymnastics, they're learning the mental skills of coping with tough, long practices and dedication and sacrifice and things like that. If you can build the athlete mentally, emotionally, and physically through a strength program with technical basics and really just, caring coaching that you're there for them in their long-term health, that sets the stage for, I think, an athlete to become an absolute animal when they get through puberty and they turn to get into their high school or their later years.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I went to one thing really, it stuck with me for a while now, is I went to a conference with Tony Minicello, who was Jessica Ennis's coach. Mm-hmm. He used analogy of like, if you put two candles on the table, right, and athlete A, athlete B is a candle, and you light the candle, that's just going to burn down slowly, but it's consistent in its development. The other one is you take a blowtorch to the other candle, like it's going to burn really bright, and you're going to have a successful athlete at its youngest age. But what's left? Not much. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get dropout, is where this one's been simmering away but consistently improving, and then this one, you smashed a load of work into them, and you haven't created that animal. They've just burnt bright and they've been successful, and then they just, unfortunately, they leave the sport because they burn out. And it struck me when you were saying that. I was like, this is the perfect time to share that analogy, is just focus in the future. And like you said, imagine what happens when you have an athlete who pops out the other side of puberty, still loves gymnastics, still loves doing physical preparation. It's like, then you're going to have some serious success when it's crunch time, when it's important. So
yeah, man, absolutely. I love that analogy. That's really good. I'm definitely going to steal that from you. But I think that a lot of this comes down to, and this is, again, a lesson that I've learned through mistakes that I've made, is it comes down to when they're younger, it's keeping them involved in gymnastics. They want to love the sport, but they have to learn the value and the input of hard work leads to success down the road, right? So that's what we're trying to teach these kids, is with basic foundations are boring, right? Like, nobody wants to do shaping. They want to do real fun stuff into the pit, or they want to compete big skills, right? Definitely strength conditioning is hard and it's a little tough sometimes. That's the part of it, right? The things that are the things that are the most rewarding in life require the most work and the most time. So you have to kind of teach those kids to delay gratification and put in the work and not look for an instant result because they did 2 days of strength conditioning or because they finally got a drill right. Like, we're teaching these people that this is the value you carry with you if you want to be successful long-term in gymnastics. Because if you love gymnastics up to 9 and you're obsessed with it, and then from 9 to 13, we can get you mega strong and super technically sound and you love being there and you're still fired up. When you hit that rough patch of going through puberty, getting to a more of a social setting in high school, it's like you have to start making compromises somewhere. And if you've, like you said, blowtorch the candle from a very young age all the way up through like a super high level when they're 12, 13, 14, well, they might not want to have, they're like, well, this is super hard and I'm going to see my friends and I'm exhausted all the time. And like, I don't really want to do this. But if you can think about that mindset in terms of, we're just going to help you continue to have fun and I'll be with you all the time. And if we get past that little chunk and you still love gymnastics, you want to do it, there's many more high level goals there. But if you just want to be healthy and safe and move on with your life, that's great too, because we use the sport to teach you the lessons that you need.
Exactly. Like, I think that as well is like, you never know where your athletes are going to end up. So, and I literally bear that in mind all the time. So, okay, if they were to leave gymnastics, like, what have I taught that athlete? Is that something that they can carry on forever? Or is that I just taught you a load of, technical and physical skills that you can use in the sport of gymnastics? But like you said, delaying gratification, trusting a process, having high standards for yourself, being accountable to a group, like all of those things make you highly employable. Choose the right friends. Long term, it's, you're developing a person and the athlete when you're having that approach. I think sometimes we get caught up in listen, they're not all going to stay in gymnastics. So what are they going to commit to? And they do. They'll swap, particularly gymnasts, they'll bounce out into another sport and be fantastic at it. So what have you given them in the meantime that is going to make them successful? And I bear that in mind daily now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've definitely come to realize that more. My old school mindset when I was a younger coach was like, it's always gymnastics. It's all about gymnastics. Everyone does gymnastics. Everyone goes high level. And, it's like, there's definitely some kids that have come through that have been successful and have wanted that. But there's also been a lot of kids who don't want that. And it's a difference of goals, which is fine. But we've had a couple athletes that we've worked with who, on the champion side, medical, and also in our own gym, is that they just learned how to work hard. They just learned how to take care of themselves and be friends and be in a community. And I think that it gave them the opportunity to learn, skills that are going to be with them for a long time. And a lot of the athletes that we've worked with, either a champion who have come for like a summer lifting program or for medical stuff and have moved on from gymnastics for an injury, but also people who weren't hurt. They're just like, I just think I want to try something else. They know how to work out. They know how to squat well and hinge well and do all these things and design a program for themselves. And they have a way to get into the gym and be healthy, and they understand about the basics of recovery, nutrition, and, hydration, stuff like that. And it's like, dude, that's invaluable, right? Like if you can teach the kid that and, it also makes them become a level 10 who gets a college scholarship, that's amazing, right? But if they just leave the sport when they're done with high school because they want to move on with life, but they have a way to work out in uni or college, and they understand these things of how to take care of yourself and make better decisions, like you said, about who they're with or the time that it takes to put in for schoolwork or getting a job and stuff. It's like, that's a huge victory, and we should all be super proud of that. You should be equally as proud as the national championship that you get, but also with the life skills that you teach someone through these programs.
Yeah, 100%. I started off coaching rugby, and it was like, I've recently had lads who have represented their country, amazing. I also have lads who became lawyers in London that I'm just equally as proud of, because both are difficult. So, and I stay in touch with both lads, because you're, the lawyer or whoever's gone into London and is crushing it. It's nice to see. Like, not everyone ends up in pro sport. So
yeah, rarely 1% of the 1%.
You're all going to be employed though if you don't. So
yeah, exactly. You definitely do a job
to be successful. So no, yeah, I hold that really, really high and valuable, but recently. So, when I was younger, I was the same. It's all about those Olympians, man. You got to have an Olympian, and then it's just about having some just really great people along my journey as well as theirs. So it means a lot.
Yeah, dude. I love that. Yeah, it's very good. So let's just dial it back and to try to wrap up this conversation about where we go from the end. So we've talked about, the implementation, the actual exercise and stuff, and we got a pretty good baseline of, that general power training and maybe the end of the off season. But how do you like to transition these things back to actual gymnastic skills? So how do you think it's good to kind of, are you working more with a technical coach and you're starting to spill, take that bucket that you said that, you used to have the priority in this off season to get them stronger and fitter? Are you bleeding stuff more into like, okay, now we can fill your bucket up technically and spend more time on the apparatus and skills and stuff, but maintain some of our physical prep? Like, what kind of things are you doing exercise wise to try to find that balance back?
So exercise wise, I would just create some priorities that I want to stay in there. And then I would then liaise with the technical coach, who is then going to start to take more of a lead. And like we talk about that pushing and pulling, it's definitely now technical coach is going to sort of take the lead, and that higher velocity stuff is going to come from them. And then I'm just going to thread the things in I need underneath that and around it.
Mm.
And then that's how we've transitioned from that, I'm making decisions. This is where we're going, to head coach is now, creating routines and teaching new skills. It's just blended, and we've just slowly just passed the baton over a little bit. So for me, I would try and keep some higher level plyometric stuff in there. So that's where we're looking at, you mentioned it earlier, like that tendon recoil. So I would be looking at some of that stuff at that later stage. So like, imagine if you pull an elastic band and then you let go. That's what I sort of teach tendon recoil as, is it's stored energy and then released energy from the tendon, not the muscle, which is just a stiffer, like more fibrous thing. And so I would keep like bounding, rebounding, plyometric work, similar for like upper body, so some like shaping things as well. And then I would just have a discussion with the technical coach about what else they would want to see. And that is a great time to be a little bit more specific for what athlete A needs and what athlete B needs, because you might be seeing two different things technically, and we might be able to just scrub some of that up and make it shine a little bit more for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of applying this to, really specific examples is like, I think you and I both use a lot of depth jumps or things like that. And so like, having somebody drop off of a 12 to 18 inch box, hit the spring floor, recoil as high as they can, and maybe do a broad jump after that. That's a very good way to get, vertical and horizontal force vectors on the spring floor itself. So if you set the block up at a moderate height, they can learn how to, do a depth jump with squat, right? And do broad jumps that way. But then they can also go back to doing some of these panel mat stiffness drills, like snap down, rebound back up to the panel mat. That's a very gymnastic specific application of that stiffness tendon recoil, right? So you have two different applications there. One is more for like maintaining the physiological adaptation of CNS, regulation and like that quick twitch fiber stuff. You're trying to maintain that through the depth jump, the broad jump. And then you're doing the stiffness stuff on the apparatus with, the actual tapping mechanics down to the panel mat, back up to the stretch jump. Those are two different areas, but they kind of get the best of both worlds. And like you said, for the upper body, there's really good examples of, like you said, you can do plyometric push-ups, maybe off of a spring floor or a springboard to get that explosive output of high force. And then you can do some push-up hops, right? Like jump on the floor itself and just work on bouncing on the tumble track, or do it on the springboard and just work on being stiff in that nice hollow dish shape, because that's going to be what you need to kind of get that snap off the floor. And you can make examples of that all around for the apparatus. That can easily be parallel bar swings for men's gymnastics, and then also working on some of the more explosive, dip jumps or things like that. And you can also make it easy on high bar, where that can be a speed rope climb, could be a very good example of trying to get fast output. But you could also just work on good old fashioned tap swings, or just arch hollow snap changes on the bar itself. There's a very different applications here, but what we're trying to do is maintain that baseline level of adaptation, like you said, but then also push it all towards the gymnastic side about, being faster with your technical apparatus. And then it becomes, the art and the beauty of having a really good technical coach is someone who sees the overlap there and is trying to develop the snap down for Yurchenko with specific drills and cues and repetitions and basics and stuff like that. That is how you marry this in a gymnastic specific setting, which is, again, same system, baseline strength, baseline power, and then the time component becomes morphed into the end of the gymnastic stuff, which is like the combination of maintaining, but also a technical coach.
Yeah. And then obviously, like, my role is to facilitate that conversation with that coach. So, I have it's called like an integrated approach. So I try and stand with a coach and offer input when they ask for it, and just make myself available for conversation. And that's something that I developed with Nick. So I was really fortunate, right? First coach was Nick Rudder. Perfect. So is that, he might sometimes, turn and say, like, physically, what's the issue? And then it's just providing them the answer at that time. So you go from basically taking lead to being a problem solver. So you're just solving small problems for the coach by the end, because actually they're doing the majority of the work, like you said, by cueing the athlete and coaching the athlete the right way to get the shapes that you want out of them. But it's nice just to be stood there watching it, seeing what you did earlier in the cycle transfer over as well. That's helping me as a coach to understand, like, actually, I can see where that's feeding in. So for me, for my knowledge as well, it's really important for me to continually learn of, like, was that 8 weeks as efficient as it could be? Next year I would look at maybe putting this in. And that's important for all coaches, is to, like, review and reflect what you're doing. And the best way to do that is watch it. For me, it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's the art and the beauty of what we're seeing happen in this giant change in gymnastics is now we're seeing, strength coaches stand side by side with technical coaches or nutritionists, talk to mental health providers, you're talking to parents and the kids, give education. I think it's really important that everybody realizes that everybody has the same cup. You know what I mean? There's only so much spot to fill water in the cup. And, the strength coach, everybody else has to manage all these things together in the gym, but also keep in mind that kids are kids and they have school, they have social lives. There's a lot of other factors that you have to kind of be attenuated to. So if you're not communicating regularly with the coach and everybody involved agrees that there's no egos allowed when we walk through the door, this is for the athletes. We're all just trying to be better at our craft. We're trying to help people. We're trying to be successful. Everybody is kind of on that same humble page and we're sharing ideas. We're trying to think about pushing and pulling. And there's, respectful conversation about like disagreement sometimes, but like, no, I think that we do need to do this. Or I think that a technical coach is like, no, I think we just need to spend more time on routines today because we have a meet coming up. And you say, okay, well, I totally agree. It gives you clout later down the road to be like, in the summer, like, yeah, I think we need more time on what we're doing here. Like we need a full hour of practice to get this physical prep done because we don't have any more time in the middle of the season. So it allows healthy conversation between people who have different expertises and you get the best of everyone's ability. It's not just like kind of butting heads with everybody.
And I think if you think back to the best coaches you've ever worked with, they are the ones that aren't afraid to ask stupid questions because they realize like what their wheelhouse is and where their role is. So, and that's the best coaches ask for help. They do.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you referred to like sort of having difficult conversations. That's fine as well. Like, I think if we all just sit there and we all just agree with everyone all the time, are we really trying to like squeeze the last drops of like improvement out of the program that we could be? So we should always be striving to get better. And sometimes to do that, we need to be able to challenge each other as professionals, not personally, but professionally. What can we do to get these lot to this level or to see more of this on the floor or to, yeah. And I think as long as you're secure in yourself and you understand that as a coach, I think, you've got nothing to worry about. It's a professional conversation. So that's fine.
Yep, absolutely, man. It comes down to, sharing those core values, sharing those core things you believe in, but then also being open to criticism yourself and being open to new ideas, but also having, the things that and the things that you're confident in. You have to kind of be like, okay, well, I agree with what you're saying here, but like, I might disagree here. Can we have a discussion about this? And I think you raised a really good point. It's not about attacking the person. It's about, you're not undermining them as humans. You're undermining, you're trying to critique the way that things are being done so everybody gets better.
Yeah. And I'm only going to weigh in on things that, I think is my wheelhouse, my given area of expertise. So you're never going to see me go, yeah, listen, I think this bar routine needs to come, like that's not my wheelhouse, but it's also the same way of you going, we need this strength exercise that I've seen a drill of. Well, I'm open to that discussion, but also just remember, that it's a to and a fro, it's a push and a pull. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that when role modeling is one of the most important things we always talk about on the podcast. And when the athletes see you having healthy discussion between a strength coach, a parent, whatever it is, that fosters a lot of their ability to have discussions with their teammates, discussions with you about when injuries start or what they're feeling or things that are not going well and things they like or don't like. I think that creating that in a culture and an environment where people feel, one, they're able to be vulnerable and make a mistake and not get reamed out for it, but two, they're open to critique and feedback and they're able to hear that back and forth. I think that's super, super powerful for those little micro interactions between people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is like you said, the athletes are naturally going to mirror the coach because they spend so much time with them as well. So when you guys are having conversations about athletes, like do it in a meeting room. So when you leave, the agreement is like we're all on the same hymn sheet. So the athlete hears the same message, whether it's from you, from me, from the technical coach. And all of a sudden this athlete's like, these guys are all sounding the same in their own different way. And then, like you said, they buy into that because it's like, well, everyone in the club is speaking the same language. So I'm in. It sounds amazing. So I think sometimes what you see is like a coach might disagree and someone else disagrees and then they take that out and they don't discuss it with the athlete, but it's evident. And then, they're intuitive. They know what's going on. They're not idiots.
Yeah, you get weird vibes at the gym.
Yeah, it should be fun. So.
Yeah.
No weird vibes, positive vibes only. So.
Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah, so that's all good stuff. I think people have a lot of information to kind of work on there. So just as a little bit of a recap, then I want you to kind of just share some thoughts on one more topic. But, understand and learn the basics of the principles of power, right? Those strength pieces, the time pieces. Within that, learn the basic strength and conditioning stuff, the movements you need to learn how to cue well and teach and plan those out for a couple cycles throughout the off season or whatever it is. And then try to make sure that you have the next progressions of power things that are more general in nature that are going to teach those athletes how to work a little bit quicker, have those kind of lined up and understand how to cue and teach those. But then also on the time component is try to make sure that you're understanding, do you know the technical foundations that you need? Do you know what shapes you're looking for? Do you know how to teach those things? What drills you like to do those things on each event and apparatus? Narrow out all those things and kind of have those pieces, the strength, the power, the technical foundation, and then try to funnel those things over the course of 8 to 12 weeks into an adaptation that objectively sees progress. And then you move that into the actual, like, okay, now let's work some skills. Now let's try to actually do sprinting drills with a hurdle at the end of it for a round off, or let's actually do some tumbling stuff into the pit and things like that to try to transfer those, newfound power gains, hopefully into what you want is gymnastic specific adaptations so that during the competitive season, you can learn and do more skills. Then you wrap it into some conditioning and metabolic stuff. And as you maintain workload and keep athletes, kind of pushing and pulling on that crankiness of maybe an injury or something, if it pops up, usually what happens is people are quite a bit happier with their performance on the power side. Would you agree? Or do you have anything else to add there?
No, I think you've summed it up. I think standard conversation is always going to bob and weave, but I think you've summed that up really well is, understand this blend, understand the principles, not the exercises. Learn how to collaborate and blend it over, and just make sure the athletes are aware of it.
Yeah, man, I love it. And also my last piece of advice would be just have a good system to track the stuff, have a binder, write the exercise in advance, like build a program out way before you're doing it. Don't just try to run around the gym and plan on the fly. It's never going to work and you're going to feel very overwhelmed. So try to make sure you're having the staff meeting and you're thinking about, okay, what exercises, what days. We've had really good podcasts with Kiefer about how to plan this stuff out. So build those programs in advance, tinker on the fly, but have a system where you can measure and you can watch these things progress over the course of month to month to month. And when you change the exercises, how to cue them and how to, explain them, but also make sure you know where you're going. You know what I mean? Like the analogy of a compass, right? If you're 2 degrees off on your compass north, by the end of it, you're going to be way off in a different continent.
Yeah, you're a long way from home. Yeah, I read on that topic, I read a good little book lately that got recommended to me called The Present. Little read, takes about 3 hours. And it's basically, in order to reduce your anxiety about the future, you need to plan for it. So if you're walking into the gym and you're doing things on the fly, I'm not surprised you're overwhelmed, because I would be. But if you have a plan in place and there's programs and it's as simple as the girls just go and pick them up and get on with it, that's a lot nicer thing. And that just comes from forward planning, like you would with your technical sessions. So for me, it's if you're feeling overwhelmed about S&C, just make sure that you're really planning when it's going to happen, what's going to happen, how are we, writing these things down, what are the girls going to be doing? Does it work in the gym? And when you've planned all that, you'll realize actually there's nothing to be anxious about. It's all set in place, and that's, I really recommend reading that book. Lovely little read, written in a story. So it's really nice.
Sweet. Yeah, definitely a good one. Yeah, I would say too, plan all that stuff out and then just be ready for things to not go well. Be ready for exercises to look weird and you got to fix them. Be ready for, some kids to only show up a little bit and you got to have a discussion about them, about being more attendant, stuff like that. And there's going to be a lot of things on the fly that you do have to work with and change. So just don't expect it to go well. Expect it, especially if this is new for you and you've never done this really in a systematic fashion before, is to just be ready to have a lot of emotional, bandwidth and patience with some of the stuff, because everyone's learning, you're learning. It's a new thing. And, you're definitely taking this in a little bit different way than you're used to. So give yourself some ability to tinker and change things on the fly after you build that plan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, completely agree.
Cool, man. Any other parting thoughts of wisdom for people about, approaching stuff with a strength coach or, trying to build in these new ideas?
I think so. I think it's just ask for help. I think as an S&C coach, when I first started out, I was crying for people just to ask me for some help. Not everything has a financial aspect attached to it. If you have a question and you have no one who can answer it, I'll happily do that. You reach out to me, I'll answer that question. And that's my thing. It's just don't be afraid to just ask for help if you're unsure of it, because I do. I ask you for help. I ask Nick for help regularly, weekly, probably sometimes. So it's just being confident enough to know, yeah, I need a little bit of help with this. I'm going to reach out. The other one is just try not to get overwhelmed with the amount of drills and exercises out there. I think there's brilliant people putting out some brilliant content. I think it's understanding where it fits in with what you're doing is the key thing. So I sometimes go into gyms and it's like a nice long list of stuff, but it's not particularly, there's no principle behind it. So I think as long as you guys know what you're chasing, like your adaptation, then you can actually apply those drills that, from the content that you're consuming easier and better. And those would probably be my two parting things is just think about what you're doing a little bit more and ask for help.
Yeah. Be careful of the shiny new toy syndrome, right? Ooh, new drill. Ooh, new drill.
Yeah, it's addictive. Right?
Yeah, it's tough.
We've all been guilty of it as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Definitely caught red-handed myself for that.
guilty. So,
cool, man. So where can people find you and give us some information about, we're going to work on some projects together with the blog and stuff like that. Where can people find you if they want more information? I know you're going to be pumping out a ton of content on your website. So
trying to. So we're, my username on all my social media is Dan Lonsdale SC. So it stands for Strength and Conditioning. And then I have a website that's just in its bare bones at the moment, but we're working on it, which is danlonsdale.com. And you can reach out to me on there by email, or then if you want to DM me on Instagram as well, I'll try and get back to you quite quickly on that as well. So that's where you can reach me.
Sweet, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm excited to see you finally be able to sink your teeth into the gymnastics world and help out more now that you kind of have a full-time thing going. And I thank you a lot for all of your information you've helped me out with, but also just the continual openness to new ideas. It's these things are, like I said, we're building on the fly here. And so it's important to have people around you that you can suggest things and then sound like an idiot and have somebody like, nah, I think you might want to change that a little bit.
It's just honest friendship, isn't it? It's just nice. It's just nice having people around you where you can do that. So no, yeah, thank you as well. It's reciprocated, isn't it? So it goes all the way. Yeah,
man, sounds good. So we'll chop this up and we'll put it up in a couple of weeks so people can dig their teeth into it as well.
Cool. Well, I hope you like it. I hope people find it useful. So let me know.
Yeah, man, it's great.
All right, cool. Righty, I'll see you later. Bye.